The Galactic Council chamber was built to remind every visitor of their place. A ring of towering figures, some physical, some projected, some existing in states humanity still struggled to define, hovered above a suspended star. Its light pulsed through layered shields, bathing the hall in shifting gold and violet. It was not decoration. It was a message, power, controlled, and eternal. At the center stood the Terran envoy alone. He did not look up. High Chancellor Veilcor regarded him from across the chamber, its elongated form shimmering between planes of reality. Its voice did not travel through air, it pressed directly into thought. Humanity has expanded beyond agreed limits, Veilcor said. Your fleets occupy systems under Council jurisdiction. Your trade routes undermine established order. The envoy, Ambassador Lauren Hale, finally raised his head. His posture was calm, almost casual, as though he stood in a negotiation hall rather than before the most powerful body in known space. Your order never included us, Hale replied. We built what we have without your permission. We don't intend to start asking now. A ripple of displeasure moved through the assembly. Veilcor did not react outwardly. Defiance is not unexpected. It is, however, unsustainable. A sphere of light formed between them, unfolding into a series of projections, Terran fleets, colonies, infrastructure nodes. Each one highlighted, categorized, measured. Humanity's trajectory destabilizes the balance of power, Veilcor continued. Left unchecked, it will result in systemic conflict across multiple sectors. Hale glanced at the data, then back at the Chancellor. You mean we're not predictable? You are not compliant, Veilcor corrected. Same thing, from your perspective. The chamber cooled. Veilcor allowed a pause long enough to signal finality. The Council has reached a unanimous decision. The projections shifted. Terms appeared clear, precise, absolute. Within 72 standard hours, Veilcor said, the Terran Empire will withdraw all military assets from disputed systems, dismantle strategic fortifications along Council borders, and submit all future expansion to Council oversight. Hale's expression did not change, but something sharpened behind his eyes. And if we don't? Veilcor's answer came without hesitation. Then corrective action will be taken. Silence followed. No elaboration. None was needed. Hale let out a quiet breath. That's not an ultimatum. That's surrender with a timer. It is an opportunity, Veilcor replied. To preserve your species. Hale smiled faintly. You don't preserve something by putting it in chains. You misunderstand, Veilcor said. We preserve what can be integrated. What cannot is removed. The words hung in the air like a verdict already carried out. Hale inclined his head slightly. Then I suppose our answer will disappoint you. Veilcor's form flickered once, the closest it came to irritation. You have 72 hours. It repeated. The chamber dimmed. The audience was over. Admiral K. Orion watched the transmission end in silence. The holographic projection of Ambassador Hale dissolved above the command table aboard the Tyrant's Resolve. Around Kale, senior officers waited, their expressions ranging from anger to grim acceptance. No one spoke first. They didn't need to. Kale stepped forward, hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. The tactical display beneath it showed Terran space in layered detail, trade routes, defensive lines, fleet positions. Systems the Council now expected them to abandon. 72 hours, Commodore Celine Mar said finally. They're being generous. Kale glanced at her. No. They're being thorough. Celine crossed her arms. You think they've already positioned their forces? I know they have, Kale replied. You don't issue terms like that unless you're prepared to enforce them immediately. A younger officer shifted uneasily. Sir, if we comply, we avoid war. Kale turned to him. Do we? The officer hesitated. Kale straightened. We pull back our fleets. We dismantle our defenses. We submit every future move for approval. He paused. What happens the next time they decide we're still a problem? No one answered. Compliance doesn't prevent conflict, Kale said quietly. It just delays it, on worse terms. Celine nodded once. And this time, we'd be weaker. Exactly. The room fell silent again, but the tension had changed. It was no longer uncertainty. It was recognition. Kale tapped the console. The display shifted, highlighting council border regions. Sensor ghosts flickered at the edges, unconfirmed contacts, unusual energy readings, movement where there should have been none. They're already moving, he said. Quietly. Celine leaned in. You're sure those aren't routine patrols? Kale shook his head. Too coordinated. Too widespread. He looked up at the officers around him. This isn't diplomacy. It's staging. Terra Prime did not sleep that night. In the capital, lights burned in every government tower. Military convoys moved through the city in controlled silence. News networks speculated, argued, demanded clarity. Inside the Imperial Palace, the atmosphere was colder. Emperor Lucian Vale stood at the far end of a long chamber, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on the stars beyond the reinforced glass. The city spread beneath him, alive and unaware. Kale entered without ceremony. You've seen the ultimatum, the Emperor said without turning. Yes. And your assessment? Kale stepped beside him. If we accept, we lose strategic control of our territory within months. Within years, we become dependent on council authorization for everything. Lucian nodded slightly. And if we refuse? Kale met his reflection in the glass. They attack. The Emperor finally turned. His expression was calm, but there was no softness in it. Which outcome do you prefer, Admiral? Kale didn't hesitate. The one where we choose the battlefield. A faint smile touched Lucian's lips. Spoken like a soldier. Spoken like someone who's read their intent, Kale replied. Lucian studied him for a moment longer. You believe they've already committed to war? They just haven't announced it yet. The Emperor walked past him, hands clasped behind his back once more. 72 hours, Lucian said. Time enough for them to finish positioning. Time enough for us to decide whether we face them standing or kneeling. Kale said nothing. Lucian stopped near the center of the room. Prepare the fleet, he said quietly. Discreetly. I don't want panic. It won't be discreet for long. No, Lucian agreed. But by then, it won't matter. Kale inclined his head. Understood. As he turned to leave, Lucian spoke again. Admiral. Kale paused. If this becomes war, the Emperor said, we do not fight to survive. We fight to ensure they never try this again. Kale looked back at him. Yes, Your Majesty. The first 24 hours passed in controlled tension. Fleets shifted under the cover of routine exercises. Supply lines rerouted. Civilian traffic quietly redirected away from vulnerable sectors. To the outside observer, nothing had changed. Inside the command network, everything had. Kale stood once more on the bridge of the Tyrant's Resolve, watching the tactical display update in real time. Every movement mattered now. Every decision carried weight. Celine approached, tablet in hand. Long-range sensors picked up increased activity along 3 council corridors. Still no official declaration. They won't declare, Kale said. They'll act. She studied him. You're certain? Kale's gaze remained fixed on the stars. Yes. A pause stretched between them. Then Celine exhaled slowly. So this is it. Kale didn't answer immediately. Beyond the viewport, the void looked unchanged. Quiet. Endless. Indifferent. But he could feel it, the shift beneath the surface, like pressure building before a storm. They gave us an ultimatum, he said at last. Celine nodded. Kale's expression hardened, something resolute settling into place. And now, he said, we decide how to answer. Far beyond Terran space, unseen fleets moved into position. The countdown had already begun. The ultimatum expired at 0300 Terran Standard. No final message came from the Galactic Council. No extension. No ceremonial condemnation. The silence itself was the answer. Admiral K.O. Ryan stood at the center of the command well aboard the Tyrant's Resolve, flagship of the First Imperial Fleet, and watched the countdown vanish from the tactical display. Around him, officers held their positions with the rigid stillness of people waiting for impact. The bridge lights had dimmed to combat settings, bathing steel-gray consoles in cold blue. For 3 days the Council had demanded surrender disguised as diplomacy. Withdraw from frontier systems. Submit fleet movements for inspection. Dismantle orbital fortresses along the Perseus corridor. Accept permanent oversight from Council observers. It had been framed as a corrective agreement, a necessary balance against Terran expansion. Cale had read the terms twice. Not because they were complicated, but because he wanted to be certain contempt had not sharpened his interpretation. It had not. The Council had not asked the Terran Empire to compromise. It had ordered humanity to kneel slowly enough to call it peace. A signal officer turned from her station. "No traffic from Council space, sir." Cale nodded once. "Keep listening." His chief strategist, Commodore Celine Marr, stepped to his side. "If they mean to strike, it'll be now. They'll want shock before we fully disperse our reserve groups." Cale kept his gaze on the main display, where the outer colonies glowed in pale clusters across a map of contested space. "They've already chosen their targets." Celine studied him. "You sound certain." "I am." That certainty had not come from instinct alone. In the final hour before the deadline, Terran intelligence had intercepted fragments of encrypted logistics traffic moving through Council relay lanes. Too coordinated for routine redeployment. Too broad for intimidation. It looked like a war plan trying to hide inside bureaucracy. Cale had spent the last 6 hours shifting patrols, moving hospital ships, and ordering civilian convoys away from vulnerable stations. He could not shield every outpost. He could only decide which ones would not die blind. The bridge remained quiet until a sharp chime cut through the air. "Contact!" the sensor officer snapped. "Multiple emergence signatures in the Vesta Reach." "No, correction. 12 separate entry points across the outer ring. Fast movers and heavy tonnage." The tactical display bloomed red. Every officer on the bridge seemed to inhale at once. Cale stepped forward. "Confirmed Council transponder classes?" "Negative official transponders. Hull architecture matches Council line formations. Energy profile consistent with sanctioned military drives." "So they came without flags?" Celine murmured. Cale's voice hardened. "Of course they did. They want conquest without responsibility." More warnings flashed. "Arden colony under attack. Communication array at Helios Gate has gone dark. Missile impact on the Ceres fuel lattice." The first blows were not random. They were surgical. Communications. Refueling. Traffic control. The arteries before the heart. Cale turned to the fleet channel. "Broadcast to all outer commands, this is not a raid. This is a theater-wide offensive. Execute War Protocol Aegis immediately." The comms officer related at once. A moment later, replies began flooding in, some steady, some strained by static and weapons fire. "Arden actual responding. Enemy destroyer wing inside defensive envelope. Helios command to Imperial Fleet, we've lost 3 platforms and we are venting atmosphere on." The transmission dissolved into noise. Celine looked at the tactical spread and swore under her breath. "They timed this perfectly. They're severing local coordination before our sector fleets can unify." Cale's expression did not change, though anger moved through him like heat under armor. The Council had studied humanity carefully. They knew Terran's strength came from mobility, layered command, and rapid reinforcement. So they struck the seams. "Patch me to all active task groups," he said. The channel opened, carrying the faces and voices of commanders across half a dozen systems. Some stood on bridges shaking with impact. One had blood on his collar. Another was framed by sparks and emergency strobes. Cale let them see him standing steady. This is Admiral Ryan. The Council has initiated open hostilities against Imperial territory. You are authorized to engage with full combat discretion. Protect civilian lanes first. Do not chase feints. Hold your cores, preserve your carriers, and deny them clean breakthroughs. A captain from the frontier group at Arden leaned toward her camera. Sir, their formations are textbook Council doctrine. Tight spacing, layered shielding, centralized fire control. Kale answered immediately. Then break the textbook. She gave a grim smile. Understood. The channel closed. Celine folded her arms. That advice will make the Academy historians cry. I didn't join the Navy to comfort historians. The first live tactical feed from Arden appeared over the main display. Terran frigates darted between habitat rings and defense towers while Council cruisers advanced in disciplined blocks, shields overlapping in perfect geometry. Their firing pattern was elegant, efficient, and merciless. Plasma lances cut through defensive satellites one after another, each shot placed with machine-like calm. For a few brutal minutes, the outcomes seemed inevitable. Council doctrine was built on control, measured movement, synchronized targeting, absolute predictability within its own structure. Against most enemies, it worked because most enemies broke first. Then the Terrans did something the Council had not modeled. An Imperial destroyer accelerated straight through its own mine screen, scraped past a crippled refinery module, rolled beneath a cruiser's firing arc, and detonated its magazine at point-blank range. The blast tore open the Council line. On the bridge, one of Kale's younger officers stared at the feed. That captain used the refinery debris as thermal cover. Celine's eyes narrowed. That maneuver violates every fleet doctrine we've written in the last century. Kale watched the opening spread through the enemy formation. Exactly why it worked. The Arden group reacted instantly. Corvettes poured through the gap. Missile boats that had played dead behind the station's shadow rose and fired in converging waves. A Council cruiser lost shields, then engines. Another drifted into the collision path of its own escort screen. For the first time that morning, the red clusters on the map hesitated. Not retreat. Confusion. Kale saw it and leaned toward the tactical table. They're recalculating. Push unpredictable vectors to all commands. No mirrored formations. No linear withdrawal patterns. Tell every captain to break rhythm. Celine was already transmitting the order. On another feed, Helios Gate burned around a shattered comms spire, yet a Terran escort squadron managed to lure two larger Council ships into the debris field of a freight yard, where their own precision tracking began working against them. Automated containers, reactor fragments, and spinning hull plates disrupted clean targeting. The Council gunners adjusted too slowly. The Terrans did not. Within minutes, the battle ceased being orderly. Which was exactly what Kale wanted. A secure line flashed at his station. Imperial Palace. He accepted it. The face of Emperor Lucian Vale appeared, austere and unreadable even under emergency lighting. Report, Admiral. The Council struck on expiry, Kale said. Outer systems are engaged across 12 fronts. Their opening objective was infrastructure paralysis. We anticipated enough of it to keep command cohesion intact. And losses? Kale glanced at the casualty column building along the lower edge of the display. Stations burning. Ships gone. Thousands of lives already turning into numbers. Significant, he said. But not decisive. The Emperor's eyes remained fixed on him. Can you hold? Kale answered without pause. Yes. It was not certainty. It was obligation spoken as certainty. Lucian inclined his head once. Then hold. Parliament has authorized full war powers. You have the Empire behind you. The line went dark. Celine exhaled slowly. That will steady the Senate. I'm less concerned about the Senate than the next 20 minutes. Another officer turned from her station. Sir, new pattern emerging. Council reserve elements are slowing outside engagement range. They're observing responses. Kale understood at once. They expected collapse. Now they're studying adaptation. Celine looked at him. Which means they'll change tactics. Yes, Kale said. And so will we. He stepped back into the center of the bridge, where every eye could find him without trying. Signal all fleets. Effective immediately, abandon formal engagement templates. I want decentralized command, independent strike discretion, and rolling feint packages deployed system-wide. If the Council wants a predictable enemy, disappoint them. The orders went out. Far beyond the flagship, across worlds and shipyards and fractured defense lines, Terran commanders began doing what their enemies considered primitive, improvising. The map still burned red. Too many colonies were under fire. Too many names were already gone. But the advance had stalled in places where it should have surged, and in war, a stall at the wrong moment could become a fracture. Kale stood in silence for a beat, watching the chaos spread through formations that had entered the battle expecting obedience from the universe. Instead, they had found humanity. This is only the beginning, Celine said quietly. Kale's eyes remained on the stars and the violence blooming between them. Yes, he replied. And now they know we answer. The war did not slow. It changed. 3 days after the first strikes, the Terran Empire still held its core systems, but the outer ring burned in scattered arcs. Stations lay gutted. Convoys drifted silent. The Council's opening assault had not broken humanity, but it had carved deep enough to expose weaknesses. Admiral K. Orion stood over a shifting map of the conflict, watching patterns emerge where chaos once ruled. The Council no longer pressed blindly. Their formations adjusted. Their strikes grew more deliberate, less rigid. They're learning, Commodore Celine Mar said, reading the same data. Kale nodded. They had to. At Arden, Terran improvisation had fractured their advance. At Helios Gate, unpredictable movement turned precision against itself. The Council had not expected resistance shaped by instinct rather than doctrine. Now they were correcting that mistake. Celine tapped the display. Their new formations are looser. Less dependency on synchronized targeting. They're sacrificing efficiency to compensate for our disruption. Which means they've identified the problem, Kale replied. Us. A faint smile crossed her face. We should be flattered. Kale didn't return it. We should be faster. He turned from the table. Call the sector commanders. Moments later, the chamber filled with projections, captains, admirals, fleet tacticians. Their faces carried fatigue, but not defeat. They had survived the first blow. That alone had shifted something fundamental. Kale stepped forward. The Council has adapted, he said. They're abandoning rigid formations and redistributing command authority across their fleets. That means fewer openings like Arden. Fewer predictable weaknesses. A commander from the outer Perseus line spoke. Then we hit harder where we already have ground. No, Kale said. We changed the battlefield again. A murmur moved through the group. Celine activated a secondary display. Streams of data unfolded. Enemy movement predictions, response curves, engagement probabilities. We've been studying their coordination systems, she said. The Council relies on predictive modeling for tactical efficiency. Their fleets operate on probability mapping, anticipating enemy behavior and responding before it fully develops. A younger captain frowned. That explains the precision of their first strikes. It also explains why they struggled when we broke pattern, Kale added. They weren't reacting. They were executing forecasts. The realization settled across the room. They're not just fighting us, Celine said. They're calculating us. Kale nodded once. So we make the calculation impossible. He tapped the console. The display shifted again, this time showing Terran fleet movements over the last 72 hours, erratic, scattered yet effective. We formalize what they fear, he said. Adaptive warfare protocol. A few commanders exchanged looks. That's not fully tested, one said. It is now, Kale replied. Silence followed. Celine took over. Adaptive warfare removes centralized engagement structure. Command decisions shift to local officers. Maneuvers are no longer synchronized across fleets. Each unit operates independently, responding to immediate conditions rather than predetermined plans. That sounds like chaos, another officer muttered. Cale met his gaze. It is. And we're choosing it, Celine said, because they can't predict it. The hesitation in the room faded, replaced by something sharper, understanding, edged with risk. A veteran admiral spoke next. We give up coordination, we risk friendly overlap, misfires, breakdown in communication. Cale didn't deny it. We accept those risks because the alternative is worse. If they can predict us, they can dismantle us. He let the weight of that settle. War isn't about perfection, he continued. It's about forcing the enemy into uncertainty. One by one, the commanders nodded. The decision spread without formal vote. The shift began within the hour. Across Terran space, fleets broke formation. Squadrons scattered into irregular patterns. Ships that had once moved in disciplined lines now drifted, darted, vanished into sensor shadows, reappeared where they were least expected. The Council noticed immediately. In the observation chamber deep within Council command space, High Chancellor Veilcor studied the incoming reports with growing stillness. Terran formations have dissolved, one of its advisors said. Their coordination appears compromised. Veilcor did not respond. A second report arrived. Then a third. Engagement outcomes are fluctuating, another voice added. Our predictive models are failing to stabilize. Probability spreads exceeding acceptable variance. That made Veilcor focus. Display the data? The chamber filled with projections, battlefields mapped in shifting layers of color and motion. Council fleets advanced, adjusted, recalculated. Terran forces moved without pattern, without symmetry, without regard for established logic. And yet, they held. In some sectors, they advanced. Veilcor narrowed its perception field. They are not disorganized, it said slowly. They are intentionally unpredictable. An advisor hesitated. That reduces their efficiency. It reduces ours more, Veilcor replied. Another feed appeared, footage from a mid-range engagement. A Council cruiser attempted to anticipate Terran movement, firing ahead of a predicted vector. The Terran ship didn't follow it. Instead, it veered into a trajectory that made no tactical sense, except that it avoided the strike entirely. Veilcor watched the sequence again. They are choosing suboptimal maneuvers, it said, to disrupt prediction. Why would they accept inefficiency? An advisor asked. Veilcor's answer came with quiet certainty. Because they understand the value of uncertainty. At the edge of the Cygnus corridor, the Terran Second Fleet executed the new doctrine in full. Cale observed from the tyrant's resolve as scattered engagements unfolded across the sector. No single line held. No formation defined the fight. Ships engaged, withdrew, re-engaged from unexpected vectors. Celine monitored incoming data streams. Their targeting systems are lagging. Reaction times increasing. Cale nodded. They're trying to re-establish prediction. Can they? Not if we keep moving like this. A signal officer turned. New intelligence packet from Deep Range Intercept. Put it up. The display shifted, revealing a network diagram, Council communication relays, command nodes, data pathways. Celine leaned closer. This is comprehensive. Too comprehensive, Cale said. Where did it come from? Unclear. Origin masked? Cale studied the network. Something about it felt precise. Deliberate. They're coordinating through centralized predictive hubs, Celine said. Even with distributed command, they still rely on core systems to process engagement data. Cale's eyes sharpened. Which means if we hit those hubs, we blind their coordination entirely, she finished. A slow realization spread between them. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was opportunity. Cale straightened. Identify the nearest active node. Celine ran the analysis. Cygnus Relay Cluster. Lightly defended compared to frontline assets. They don't expect us to strike that deep yet. Kale allowed himself a brief, thin smile. Then let's disappoint them. He opened a fleet-wide channel. All units, this is Admiral Ryan. New priority target identified. We are shifting from defensive posture to localized offensive operations. Strike groups will engage Council relay nodes where feasible. Disrupt their coordination. Force them to fight blind. A captain's voice came through. Sir, that puts us inside their operational envelope. Yes, Kale said. That's the point. Celine watched him. This is the turn. Kale met her gaze. It has to be. The first strike on a relay node came less than an hour later. A small Terran task force slipped past outer patrols, using debris fields and erratic movement to mask approach. They did not engage the defensive screen directly. They ignored it. Instead, they drove straight for the relay core. Council ships responded, but too late. Their predictive models placed the Terrans elsewhere, reacting to phantom movements instead of the real threat. The relay station erupted in a controlled chain of detonations. Across the sector, Council coordination faltered. On the Tyrant's resolve, the effect was immediate. They're losing synchronization, Celine reported. Response delays increasing across multiple engagements. Kale watched the map shift, red clusters fragmenting, their cohesion breaking. For the first time since the war began, the balance tilted. Not decisively. But enough. Celine exhaled slowly. We can hurt them. Kale's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. We already are. He looked out at the spreading battlefield, at the enemy that had expected obedience, and found resistance instead. This is where it changes, he said. Not hope. Not survival. Something sharper. We don't just endure this, Kale added quietly. Celine glanced at him. No? He shook his head. We make sure they regret it. The war reached its turning point without ceremony. There was no single battle, no dramatic collapse. Instead, pressure built across 100 engagements until something fundamental gave way. Council fleets, once precise and composed, began to fracture under strain they had not anticipated. Admiral Kale Ryan watched it unfold from the Tyrant's resolve. Status, he said. Commodore Celine Mar scanned the incoming data. Cygnus relay cluster is fully offline. Secondary nodes across 3 sectors are compromised. Their coordination lag is increasing with every strike. Kale studied the shifting map. Council formations still held in places, but the cohesion that defined them was gone. Ships reacted instead of anticipated. Their advantage, calculated certainty, was eroding. They're fighting blind, Celine added. Not blind, Kale corrected. Just human. Celine allowed a brief smile. That's worse for them. A signal officer turned from her station. Incoming transmission, priority encryption. Source. Galactic Council. The bridge stilled. Kale considered it for a moment, then nodded. Put it through. The air before him shimmered as the projection formed. High Chancellor Veilcor appeared, its presence filling the space with a quiet, controlled intensity. Even distorted by distance, it carried authority like gravity. Admiral Ryan, Veilcor said. Kale met its gaze without moving. Chancellor. A brief silence followed, not empty, but measured. Both sides understood what had already changed. You have exceeded projected resistance parameters, Veilcor said at last. Your forces demonstrate a capacity for adaptation that was not fully accounted for. Kale's tone remained even. You miscalculated. That is evident. Celine glanced at Kale but said nothing. Veilcor continued. This conflict has reached a threshold where continued escalation risks destabilizing multiple sectors beyond Terran space. Then you should have considered that before you attacked, Kale replied. A faint distortion rippled through Veilcor's form. The Council acted to preserve long-term stability. You tried to control something you didn't understand, Kale said. Now you're losing control. Another pause. Then Veilcor spoke, its voice quieter, more deliberate. We are prepared to discuss terms. Celine's eyes flicked to Kale. The shift was unmistakable. Kale folded his hands behind his back. You issued an ultimatum, not a negotiation. Circumstances evolve, Veilcor said. Convenient, Kale replied. The Chancellor did not respond immediately. When it did, the tone had changed again, less distant, more direct. What do you want, Admiral? Kale didn't answer right away. He turned slightly, looking past the projection at the tactical display. Fires still burned across Terran space. Ships still fought and died. This was not victory. Not yet. He faced Veilcor again. Transparency, he said. You don't get to hide behind silence anymore. Veilcor tilted its form. Clarify. You attacked without declaration, Kale said. You planned this long before the ultimatum. You expected compliance or collapse. That is irrelevant to resolution. No, Kale said quietly. It's the only thing that matters. Celine understood first. You're not just ending this, she murmured. You're exposing them. Kale didn't look at her. Yes. Veilcor's presence sharpened. You risk destabilizing the entire council structure. You did that the moment you decided we shouldn't exist on equal terms, Kale replied. The chamber held its breath. Finally, Veilcor spoke. What is your condition? Kale stepped forward. You transmit full records of this operation, he said. Orders, planning, intent. Every system, every species sees exactly what the Council chose to do. Silence followed, longer this time. That would undermine authority across all member civilizations, Veilcor said. Kale's voice remained steady. That's not my problem, Celine added quietly. It's yours. Veilcor seemed to recede slightly, as if withdrawing into calculation. And if we refuse? Kale didn't hesitate. Then we continue, he said. And next time, we don't stop at your relay nodes. The implication hung between them, clear and absolute. Veilcor studied him. For the first time, there was no certainty in its presence, only assessment. You would escalate to direct Council core systems, it said. Kale's expression did not change. You already escalated. We're just answering. Another silence stretched. Then, slowly, Veilcor inclined its form. Your terms will be considered. The transmission ended. The bridge remained quiet for several seconds after the projection vanished. Celine exhaled first. They're shaken. They're thinking, Kale said. And if they choose not to comply? Kale turned back to the tactical display. Then we make sure they regret it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Orders moved through the fleet. Terran forces did not withdraw. They tightened pressure. Additional relay strikes targeted secondary networks. Disruption spread deeper into Council space, not enough to provoke total collapse, but enough to make the threat real. A message not of desperation, but of control. Hours passed. Then the signal came. Incoming broadcast, the comms officer said. Council-wide frequency. Unsecured. Celine looked up sharply. They're doing it. Kale nodded once. Put it through. The display filled with data, vast, unfiltered. Operational logs. Strategic directives. Authorization chains. The full record of the ultimatum and the attack that followed. Across the galaxy, every listening system received it. Proof. The Council had not acted to preserve order. It had acted to eliminate a threat before it grew too strong. Reactions came quickly. Independent systems demanded answers. Member species questioned authority. Trade alliances faltered. Trust fractured. The Council had built its power on control and perception. Both were now compromised. Celine watched the incoming reports. They've lost the narrative. They've lost more than that, Kale said. The war did not end that day. But it changed again. Council fleets withdrew from Terran space, not in retreat, but in recalibration. Engagements slowed. Front lines stabilized. Communication channels reopened, not as demands, but as negotiations. Real ones. On Terra Prime, the lights burned just as they had before, but this time, the tension carried something different. Relief. Caution. Respect. Kale stood once more in the observation ring above Earth, the planet turning slowly beneath him. The same view he had watched before the war, unchanged in its quiet beauty. Celine joined him. "It's over," she said. Kale shook his head slightly. "No. It's different." She considered that. "They won't try this again." "No," Kale agreed. "Not like this." A pause stretched between them. Celine glanced at him. "You didn't destroy them when you had the chance." Kale looked down at the world below. "That wasn't the objective." "What was?" He turned his gaze back to the stars. "Make sure they understand us," he said. Celine followed his gaze. "And do they?" Kale's voice was quiet, but certain. "They do now." Far beyond Terran space, the Galactic Council began to change, forced by exposure, by consequence, by the realization that humanity would not be shaped into something predictable. They had issued an ultimatum. Humanity had answered. Not with surrender. With defiance, adaptation, and the kind of resolve that could not be measured, modeled, or contained. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what that meant.